Adrian? He was a sociopath. He said that I could never leave him. He controlled how I looked and what I wore. Then it was controlling when I left the house. And eventually, what I thought.
Hello and welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. I'm Anna, co-founder of the Final Girls and your podcast host. Another bonus episode for you this week focused on a new release which you just couldn't resist covering, The Invisible Man, a reimagining of the classic universal monster that first graced the screen in James Whale's 1933 film adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel. This version takes it in an entirely new direction. Scripted and directed by Leigh Whannell, a name already well known in the genre world for having co-created the Saw franchise with his frequent collaborator James Wan. He wrote the first 3 installments and starred in the first one, the Insidious film franchise, and for writing the horror films Cooties and The Mule. As a director, Whannell made his debut with Insidious Chapter 3, wrote and directed the very excellent sci-fi horror Upgrade, and now really cements himself as a horror filmmaker with The Invisible Man. His take on the classic story turns the focus to Cecilia Cass, played here by Elizabeth Moss, a woman who manages to escape from a controlling, abusive relationship with a wealthy and brilliant tech entrepreneur. But when Cecilia's ex commits suicide, she suspects his death was a hoax. Her sanity begins to unravel as she desperately tries to prove that she's being hunted by someone nobody can see. I'm not going to say much else about the plot, except that it's an entirely new spin on the classic story, achingly modern, and such a sensitive and horrifying tense ride of a film. The Invisible Man does what horror does best. It talks about difficult subjects while serving you up with a thrilling dose of entertainment and scares. I'm joined in this episode by podcaster and regular guest Becky Dark. Spoiler alert, we both love the film. We work really hard to refrain ourselves from spoilers in the first part of our conversation. And I cannot stress this enough. This is a film best watched knowing as little as possible. So we'll make it very clear when we're going to move into spoiler territory to discuss some of the finer details of The Invisible Man. Following that, I was lucky enough to sit down with Leigh Whannell himself to talk about the making of the film, his influences, his collaborative process with Elizabeth Moss, and a lot more. So I'll make a note of when you can skip to the interview in the show notes. The film comes out in the UK this Friday, the 28th of February, and if you're up for an intense, highly stressful 2 hours, I can't recommend it enough. Hopefully this episode isn't as stressful, but we'll see.
What happened to him?
Adrian's dead.
Listen, you're getting your freedom back, okay?
He said that wherever I went, he would find me. Walk right up to me, and I wouldn't be able to see him. Adrian is dead. He's not dead. He has figured out a way to be invisible.
Hi, Becky.
Hello, Anna.
I'm so excited to talk about The Invisible Man with you.
I'm also really excited.
We were starting to talk about it earlier and kind of stopped ourselves to make sure to save
That's
all of
right.
our reactions
I know.
for this.
I started talking about a thing and then I was like, no, I'll wait.
What were your initial impressions of the film?
I was hugely impressed. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't actually know a lot about it going in. I knew it was Elizabeth Moss, who I love, and I knew it was Leigh Whannell. Who I know from the Insidious films, the first couple of which I really like, and the third one, which he then directed, I'm not a huge fan of, but then Upgrade, I love. So when I found out that he was, behind this, and writer and director as well, I was like, okay, well, this is a really good meeting of talent. But, I went in with relatively reserved expectations, and I came out and I was like, yeah, that was really good.
Same. Very much same. Did you have any relationship with the original Universal monster?
No, I haven't actually seen the original Universal. I've seen a few of the classic monsters from the Universal kind of canon, but not the Invisible Man. I think it is one of those, or he is one of those kind of monsters that is enough in kind of public consciousness that I'm aware of it. I've definitely seen clips of it. Kind of, I think he like nicks a bike and knocks someone's hat off, and obviously I'm kind of aware of that.
The iconography,
and the very sort of specific. He's got quite a specific silhouette, which is actually kind of played on in the new film at one point. But I haven't actually seen the film, and I think actually my sort of biggest relationship with the Invisible Man is probably Hollow Man. The Kevin Bacon vehicle from mid-90s?
2000.
Never.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. The Paul Verhoeven classic.
Classics a word.
It's a term.
Yeah, it is.
I think the Hollow Man is mostly known for having an invisible penis swinging around. Yeah. Oh, I'll probably cut that.
The thing that I remember most about it, I remember when I saw it, I can't believe it was 2000. So when I saw it, just being like really kind of like freaked out by it. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but there are images and scenes from that film that have really stayed with me, and I've never seen it a second time, and I don't really want to, because Kevin Bacon's so nasty in it.
It's a really lecherous film, that one, isn't it?
Really lecherous. There's a horrible sexual assault scene in it, and there's also that gross bit where he like crushes the rat.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
And so, like, he's obviously, his hand's invisible and you see the rat, and then he crushes the rat, and then, like, the effects show you, like, all the kind of goo coming out of the rat, but, like, you can't see his hand, so you see the whole thing. It's, like, totally gross.
Now I kind of want to see it.
Yeah. It's probably on YouTube, so you don't have to see, like, the whole film again.
How do you think Leigh Whannell updates this idea of the Invisible Man to 2020?
Well, I mean, it's so grounded in this idea of domestic abuse, and the notion that you could have somebody that you're living with and you are in an abusive relationship with, that you're desperate to escape, and then you think you've escaped, but that terror that they are able to not only continue to kind of like come after you and affect your life and like really terrorize you, but that A, you can't see them, and B, no one believes you. Like, to me, that is really, really terrifying. And I think that the conversations around kind of domestic abuse and people believing victims and believing women that's a very pertinent topic.
It feels so topical without being forced.
I agree.
And it just uses the language of cinema and the iconography of the Invisible Man so well, in my opinion. Like, it, regardless of how you choose to interpret it, because I think there's different ways. You can give it this intense reading of it being about women or victims of domestic abuse and gaslighting being disbelieved. I thought it was a lot about trauma as well, and just how difficult and slow and painful and every day it is to get out of certain patterns. And then it just works so beautifully as both as an update of a classic monster, which is sort of a comical figure at this point. So making him scary again, even, modern interpretations of it, like the Hollow Man, are still a bit basic.
There was a kind of campness to Hollow Man, but not like fun camp, just kind of,
but it
low quality.
And it never kind of really got scary in the way that the best horror films are.
I agree.
Like, it's never really insidious, and that's not a pun, no pun intended, but the best horror, for me at least, is the one that stays under your skin for reasons that you might not necessarily articulate in the moment or even understand fully, but the images or the ideas that it plants in you just sit there with you. And did you find this film actually scary?
Anna, I came out of this screening exhausted. Like, so it's 2 hours long.
Yeah. Go by so quickly.
So quick. And really the only kind of feeling of the length of the movie was just that I came out and I just felt like wrung out. I moved around in my seat probably more than I can remember in like recent memory of like cinema trips, because I was like leaning forward with my kind of hands over my mouth, and then something like really like tense, and sort of the tension would start to build, and I'd start to get a bit nervous about what was happening on screen, and I'd sort of lean back, and then it would get worse and worse, and I'd start like sinking down, and then I'd be like, I'm almost off of my seat, and so I'd have to kind of wiggle my way back up again so I was sitting up straight, and then I'd realise that about 15 minutes later it happened again. Like it's super, super tense, and like, yeah, I was like physically reacting to it.
It does feel so visceral, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And so much of that I thought was down to Elizabeth Moss's performance.
She is remarkable in this film.
I mean, like the Gina Rowlands of her generation, just like that sort of power to draw you in, I think, to just completely empathize with what she's feeling in whatever role she's in.
And I think what's so impressive about this performance specifically is you never really see the monster, you know, I know that sounds ridiculous because it's called The Invisible Man. What I mean by that is that Adrian never really, because he is this master manipulator, this, you know, gaslighter, he never really shows outwardly that monster within. And so we have to read it all through Elizabeth Moss's performance and the way that she reacts to him physically, the way that we watch her kind of creeping around, or, you know, whatever.
So we see the effects of his behavior more than we see the behavior.
Exactly. And, you know, she's in almost every scene of this movie. And I say that I was exhausted at 2 hours of watching it. Like, what it must have been like to make for her. Like, it's a physical performance, not so much in that she's doing sort of big action set pieces or anything, but her posture is so important, the way she moves around, creeping around, you know, the way she sort of knits her brow, like everything portrays this sort of this woman who's on the verge of breaking, but still somehow managing to muster this kind of inner strength to try and get herself out of this situation.
But also this massive hyper awareness.
Yes.
Like this paranoia that she feels about everything, but kind of calculated. Like it's paranoia that's feels almost like a reaction to a threat, to a constant threat.
Yes.
And to constant surveillance. Like she's constantly looking for ways to protect herself, to understand what the surroundings are, what is the layout, where are the cameras, who's looking, what are the entry points. Like she's constantly trying to protect herself. And I found it so amazing. The intensity of her performance is such that even before we see any violence, in the first scene when we first meet her, she's in bed, and even just Adrian's hand on her hip is just so already domineering, just by the way that she reacts to getting up out of bed in the middle of the night.
You know, if you're in bed with a loved one and they've got their arm draped over you, you may move it kind of gingerly because you don't want to disturb them, but that's not what she's doing. And the subtlety of her performance is such that even though she's moving his hand in a way that could be seen as, oh, well, you know, she just doesn't want to wake him up. Yeah, but why doesn't she want to wake him up? And you know that from just like the look on her face, the way she opens her eyes in that first close-up shot of her face. She's obviously not been asleep. That is not a slow opening of her lids as she kind of comes around. She's been pretending to sleep and waiting, and then bang, her eyes are open and she's moving. And that is, you know, it's those little things that really start to make the audience understand the situation that she's in.
I mean, even before we know what the situation is, we already feel the tension. That first scene where which is almost entirely in the trailer, where she runs away from the home, is so tension filled. It just puts you on edge from the very first shot.
Absolutely. I was not expecting the opening of The Invisible Man to essentially be a prison break. I mean, that's what she's doing. And you're right, that tension is almost from the first shot. And it's all, you're with her. You don't want her to make a noise, and then there will be a noise, and, you feel the panic that she feels. And honestly, it's an amazing performance.
We were talking about this before, but actually in retrospect, when the trailer first got released, and it's quite long, I think it's 2.5 minutes or something, I thought that, this is giving too much away. I don't like it. And then stuff started going on online after the first people had seen the film. And after having seen the film, I can absolutely, I think, guarantee that it sets up the tension, but it does not actually reveal almost anything about the film.
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny because when we first sat down, I said, well, have you seen the trailer? It's ridiculous. It gives so much away. Like, it almost shows that entire opening. And then you said, well, yeah, but it doesn't really show much from later, does it? And I was like, oh, it does. It shows everything. And we rewatched it. I was like, no, you're right. It really doesn't. But what it does do is, I was watching it again. It was almost like I had PTSD. I was like, oh my God, I'm terrified all over again.
I mean, it's quite difficult to talk about this film without revealing too much about it. But kind of we'll go into spoiler territory now. But is there anything you want to touch upon for people who may not have seen the film yet? It comes out on Friday. That would potentially entice them to come and see it.
I think if you like horror to like really shit you up, but not in a kind of supernatural, like, so Hereditary, for example, is the last film that really shat me up, and that, it had that kind of supernatural layer. This is very much in the real world, even though the Invisible Man is in it. It's very anchored in reality, and I mean, it's really affecting. And if you want something that, you're going to sort of sit there for 2 hours and wiggle about in your seat for, then I think it's a good film.
It works so much as a kind of domestic thriller.
Yes, absolutely.
As much as it does as a horror film.
Absolutely.
Where are you? Show yourself!
Surprise.
So we're going to move on to the spoiler stuff now. And honestly, I've been just gagging to talk to someone about all of the stuff in this film.
Let's do it.
Oh my God. Okay, can we talk about Adrian for a second?
Yes.
Because I found Adrian fascinating. He is essentially the contemporary villain, which is a high-tech, multimillionaire, hyper smart, narcissistic playboy. Well, calling him a playboy is not fair.
Yeah, that's kind of misleading, but I know what you mean.
He is like an Elon Musk type dude.
He's very handsome. He's very charismatic. And I think,
he's a charming psychopath.
Exactly.
But
you learn a little bit about how Adrian and Cecilia meet, and later on she's sort of saying, why me? Why did you pick me out of the crowd? I think they met at some event or like a friend's party or something. And the way that she sort of talks about their meeting, you can imagine him sort of, this charming billionaire, hyper intelligent. And that's how narcissists work. That's how, manipulators and abusers work, is they have to be charming, because otherwise people just, keep their distance. They need to be able to draw people in, and like that just rolls off him, I think.
Oh, totally. But it's interesting that we don't really get to meet that side of him except through Cecilia's narration and her describing of their relationship. We barely even get to see him. Like, I thought for a long time that throughout the film, we see him at the very end, physically see him. But I thought that he was going to remain in the shadows. I was like, oh, that would have been so cool if he was literally a faceless villain who then becomes invisible through his own intelligence and technology. And we never actually get to put a face to this person that we've built up through other people's talk and other people's conversation about him. We do get to meet him.
Reactions to him, his brother's reactions to. I found the brother fascinating as well.
Go on.
Well, just he, again, a little like we were saying with Elizabeth Moss, he's got this physicality, and as you learn more about the relationship that he has with Adrian, and the kind of power that Adrian wields over his brother, you can start to read like the exhaustion on his face, his slightly sort of hunched over. So even though he appears to be quite a high-powered lawyer and, you know, has these very plush offices, and he's sort of turned in on himself and he looks a bit sickly and browbeaten. And, you know, he's obviously, again, being manipulated. And I think you're supposed to see in him this kind of, you know, he's kind of callous and sort of, I don't know, like I think you're supposed to see him as a bad guy. And then as the story unfolds, you realise that, again, he's just been somebody who's been kind of turned into this person by Adrian's kind of effect upon him, which...
I loved one of Cecilia's best burns towards the brother is when she literally tells him, it's like, you're just a jellyfish.
Oh, yes.
You're just a spineless version of your brother.
Yes.
You're sort of mean, you're sort of crooked, but you're not really. You're just doing it because someone else told you what to do and they gave you the tools to do it.
Yeah.
But you couldn't come up with any of this shit by yourself.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so to the point.
That scene when they're across the table from each other in the hospital and he essentially unveils himself to be like, you know, actually, you know, I'm in on it. Adrian's still alive. This is the deal. That sort of one-on-one was just amazing. I was hooked.
I loved it. It really validates the whole of Cecilia's journey, because at one point I almost started to falter, being like, oh, is she actually maybe making some of this up? And it's
it paranoia?
Yeah. And the whole journey of her being gaslit by Adrian, by his brother, by this whole set of circumstances around her. What did you make of that approach to the story?
So it had that kind of the classic trope, I guess, of, you know, her having the meds in the classic sort of American orange prescription medication bottle, which is so used throughout horror, especially the horror that codes the woman as this hysterical, paranoid, you know, kind of unreliable narrator. But it's used in such a clever way in this. So he uses it as this kind of clue, this kind of plant to give her this clue that, you know, actually he's back, because she knows that she's dropped it. It's got the blood on it. And you're right, there are points. It walks the tightrope very cleverly, I think, between, you know, us knowing she's not crazy. Like, we know she's not. We see the footsteps on the sheet. We think we see the imprint in the chair. We see the cold breath behind her when she stood out on the porch. We know there's something. But like you say, how much of it is her... I mean, she's got PTSD. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And how much of it is that? And the line, I think, is walked very cleverly. And I like that. So I'm not a particular fan of things being too ambiguous in movies. I like it when it's got a bit of a question mark hanging over it. But by the end of the movie, I prefer it if I know which way it's gone, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, you know, I like that it does give you those effects that you know, they're cool. They kind of show you that the Invisible Man is there. But I think it gives you just enough to kind of make you almost like just empathise with her family, because, you know, she's got her sister who doesn't know what to believe. She's on the receiving end of some really confusing communication. James, the cop that she's staying with.
I love that relationship. By the way. I love James's relationship with his daughter.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Obsessed. I love the fact that he's so clear, protective, but also knows his boundaries and priorities, but listens and is so empathetic and generous, but then really kind of, you know, oh no, this is my home.
This is my daughter.
Yeah.
I need to protect her as a priority.
But also no hint at all of any romantic relationship. And I love that shit.
Zero. So
I
good.
love it.
And, you know, you couldn't blame her, because, man, can that guy wear a pair of trousers. His physicality is so important because he's massive, and she is in his house, and really, you know, firstly, he's very physically imposing.
Yes.
Secondly, he's a cop, so he's
a figure with authority, both physically and through, you know, societal norms.
Exactly. Because he's a cop and it's the States, you know, he'll be armed, which is always an extra kind of...
And he's a father, so he's a protective figure in every possible way.
That is exactly right. But because it's the Invisible Man, he can't do anything.
That scene where Adrian... Well, actually, it's not Adrian, is it? Ooh. When the Invisible Man beats up James and incapacitates him, my heart just sank, because every single barrier of protection that Cecilia and we had is taken down. James is just this figure of protectiveness on every single level. And if he's down, then what else is left?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the casting of Elizabeth Moss is so good because she's small, she's petite, and even though she's got a lot of physical presence throughout so much of the movie, as I said, you know, she's so turned in on herself. She is a victim. She's been made a victim, and she's very physically small. And I think, again, that sort of, because she's in James's house, that contrast between him and her, it makes her look even tinier. In fact, I think Sydney, the daughter, even has like a couple of inches on her. So
she does. Yeah, she's tiny.
So, I mean, yeah, you're 100% right.
So when she actually gets attacked physically by the Invisible Man, it becomes so horrific because she's literally lifted up like a rag doll. It's horrifying to watch. And the camera movements as well that he uses are so... I mean, it's not dissimilar to some of the tricks that he pulled in Upgrade. Very different contexts and kind of serve different purposes, but just visually so assaulting. And you really feel them, because previously up until those moments, the film is so the camera is so well behaved in so many ways.
What a great way to put it.
You know what I mean? Like, it's very classical in its approach. The tension is horrendous. But the cameras, the stylings of it actually are quite withdrawn. Like, you know, where it's a lot of very fixed shots, a lot of focusing and creating tension around inanimate objects, around the possibility of someone being there, of someone watching.
Yeah, you have hit the nail on the head.
So when he actually attacks her, it feels like a fucking punch.
Yeah. That... What you're saying there about the building of tension with those static shots and those wide shots, and whether it was Leigh Whannell or whether it's the DP or the cinema, you know, whoever has sort of come up with the way that they've done that is so clever, because they are playing on, as horror fans, I think, specifically, they are playing on our expectations. When you have a wide static shot, you are looking, right, where is he then? What's going to move? What's going to knock off? What's going to flutter? You know, where's a footprint going to suddenly appear, or a curtain move? And it doesn't. And so you don't get that relief. You're just, it holds it and holds it and holds it. And then the camera will either move or it'll cut to something and you're like, well, where is he then? You know, if he's not there, where is he? We're relying on those little visual cues to let us know where he is. And when they don't, you're like, oh my God, maybe he's behind me. You know, he could be anywhere. And that I thought was so clever and
so right.
fucking terrifying.
You're so right. I mean, like, literally after I came back home from that film, I was staring in every single corner in my apartment being like, is there something there? Is there something there? Every time a fucking cat stares at a point in the room, I'm like, well, there's something there. I'm convinced.
I would love to have a pet, but today I'm extremely grateful that I don't, because I moved into a new house in November last year. So, you know, only like 3 months ago. And it's a lot larger than the flat that we were in previously. And tonight will be the first night that I am in that house alone on my own. And if I had a cat or something just sort of suddenly looking into a corner or like peering over behind a door or something, I don't know what I would do, but I would probably lock the doors behind me and run for cover.
Literally, my cat does that all the time, where he'll just stare at a point on the wall or in the room, and it's like, there's nothing there. Or is there?
Exactly.
And after seeing this fucking film, I was like, there is. 100% there is. It just taps into this fear of, and we're talking with Rihanna about a completely tonally different film, Practical Magic, but how it taps into this fear of being watched or stalked, or someone just looking through or sort of invading your safe space. And that could be a place of work. It could be a friend's house, your room, whatever it may be. We all have those spaces where we feel completely secure. And suddenly this feeling of someone being in there that shouldn't be there, whatever it may be. And Elizabeth Moss plays it to perfection, because even just looking at her face, looking at a fixed point, at a chair or at a place on the floor, is terrifying, because you can instantly empathize with the paranoia or the notion that maybe there's something else.
That she's like sensing the presence of
and
somebody.
It could be supernatural and it cannot be, but there's something weird. And what did you think of the way that the Invisible Man does not resort to supernatural or otherworldly elements to tell the story?
I don't like all its eyes. It's like, just in case you needed to make this film even fucking creepier, he's got a suit on that looks like some sort of like hell monster with like a million eyes, blinking eyes.
You're just moving your hands in a way that makes it so much creepier.
It's not okay, Anna. I wasn't into it.
It reminded me of the teeth monster from Channel Zero.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
There's too much of everything.
Just too many eyes. I don't like it.
Well, it's very spider-like,
it's
isn't
very
it?
spidery. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, like, what is he? He's like an optics genius
expert.
Yeah,
genius.
So
inventor.
Are they like, I don't know if they're cameras or
that's
sensors
even
or
doubly terrifying,
like,
if they're mini cameras,
right?
Yeah.
But the way they like move independently, honestly, as if. I know that I just keep doing this with my hands, which is podcast gold, obviously. But
it's sort of constantly blinking, aren't they?
yes, exactly.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Blah. It was horrible.
Yeah, the detail of that. And it also gave him sort of texture
I know.
that was inhuman. Because in the previous incarnations,
it's inhuman. That is right.
Even though it's not supernatural, even though there's no mad medicine going on, even though it's a suit, like, you know, it's a piece of clothing.
It's technology, isn't it? Like your point earlier.
The fact that, you know, he's still a human being, but he's made this texture that his skin takes when he's wearing the suit. And it's only really visible when she throws paint at him, or he's got blood on him,
or
or
she
it's
like stabs him and it kind of breaks some of them.
Yeah, it's malfunctioning, but it's got this texture that's like, oh, that's not skin, that's not someone, that's like a thing. And then it becomes even scarier, because even though there's a really horrendous human being in that suit, it then becomes sort of a monstrous thing.
Yeah,
because
you're
you
absolutely
don't really
right.
want to touch that.
Oh no.
No.
Oh,
Still moisturizer that can fix that. We were mentioning before the fact that the trailer doesn't actually reveal as much of the film as we're led to believe when we first watch it. What did you think about all the twists and the turns that are revealed in the third half of the film?
So you find out that the brother was in on it all along. And one of the bits that really sort of pulled me up short, and I was like, oh shit, maybe I don't know what's happening, was when they initially reveal that it's the brother underneath the suit. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening. But then, it's very clever and it kind of, explains why that is. I thought the reveal with the contraceptive pills and the fact that she's pregnant is earth-shattering, because it takes that notion of domestic abuse and it elevates it from beyond kind of mental torture, beyond the possibility that he's been violent to her, to the fact that he's not necessarily been sexually violent, because I don't think we're supposed to get the impression that he has forced himself on her or raped her.
I think it's a little bit implied, but it's never made explicit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What he's actually done is he's swapped out her contraceptive pills. So when they are having sex, and I think, you're right, if she is unhappy in the relationship, then that's probably non-consensual. But she then is, told by the doctor once she is incarcerated, or once she's in the psychiatric sectioned, thank you. She is told by the doctor once she's sectioned that she's actually pregnant, and that is just,
it's like the ultimate control.
Yeah,
it's like
the ultimate invasion.
Her body is not even her body, it's his. He controls what, not just the control over her fertility or her choice whether to have children or get pregnant or not, but just being able to continue to invade her.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
It's very brilliant writing, and it's very fucking grim.
Yeah, it's really grim. And this sort of maybe gives a bit of a sort of glimpse into actually how intense this movie is, because when she steals the pen and she runs the shower and she goes to get into the shower, I thought she was going to give herself an abortion. Or I thought she was going to try and lose the baby,
herself.
Get rid of the baby. And even though that's not what happens, I just suddenly thought, bloody hell, it goes to show what this film has made me think up to this point, if that's where I thought it was going next. It's quite full on.
Yeah.
But obviously what she actually does is she uses it as a law for him, because he is now desperate to have this baby. And the brother, the lawyer, when he basically does the reveal that he's in on it, he is saying, you can come back as long as you keep the baby, you can basically live how you want, he'll give you whatever you want, but you have to keep the baby. And of course, so her law is very clever, because she makes him think that she's going to kill herself. And that's when he reveals himself. And that's when she fucking stabs him in the chest a bunch of times. And it was brilliant.
Yes, it was. Just to wrap up, what were your thoughts about the final twist?
So the fact that she basically gets herself back into the house with him, gets him to reveal himself, and then all she needs, because there's right up until the end, she's
He
sure.
keeps trying to gaslight her right
Yeah.
up until the end.
Yeah. And she's sure, but she's not sure. There's that little doubt in her mind. Is this all in my head? Like, I know it's not all in my head because I know he's alive. I can see him in front of me, but I need to be 100% sure. And when she gets him to speak that word, when he says surprise, which obviously she'd heard a couple of times earlier in the film, she knows it was him. She knows it wasn't the brother. She knows it was him. And then, you know.
Goosebumps. You're giving me fucking goosebumps right now.
It's so good.
So brilliant.
And then she's so cold and calculated, and I just thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a brilliant ending. I feel like we'd gone on such a roller coaster with this character, and you know, she
leaves with the suit.
yeah yeah, she does.
She does.
Do you think she keeps the baby?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
In my head, I would prefer her not to, in the sense because you can feel that it's taken her so long to crawl out of that prison.
Yeah.
The physical prison, the mental prison, the emotional one, and then this other high-tech horrific haunting. And then I don't want her to have any part of Adrian left.
Yeah. I completely get that. And often what I think when I'm trying to kind of figure out, you know, did this thing happen at the end of a movie, or did they make this decision after the credits rolled or whatever, I try and put myself in the character's shoes. And in this, I just don't know what I'd do. I don't know. I agree with you. I'd prefer it if maybe she didn't, just mainly because it just wasn't her choice. But then maybe that's the final kind of that last bit of kind of agency is that decision whether to keep it or not. And you know, she does look that, you know, the final shot of the film is that kind of that close up on her face as you sort of see almost her relief and the realization that he's gone and that she is now back in control of her life. So yeah, I don't know.
I kind of love that they leave it open-ended.
I do as well.
It's that question mark that they leave at the end that doesn't really affect the rest of the film, I don't think.
Exactly.
Doesn't ruin it, doesn't make it better. It's just something for the character to deal with.
Yeah.
And it leaves us, it doesn't change your relationship to her.
And in fact, after everything that she's been through, because we haven't even talked about the fact that he kills her sister.
Oh, God. There's so much!
You know, she's been through so much. You know, accused of her sister's murder. She's been impregnated. She's been made to think that she's...
accused of hitting Sydney.
Yes.
Of violating the trust of every person that's protected her and helped her.
Exactly. And in some ways, it would be too neat for it to just be like her kind of gazing off into the distance and you know that all of those ends are wrapped up. It's good that you know that almost after the credits has rolled, she's still got some stuff to grapple with, because otherwise I feel like it would almost undermine the shit that poor woman has been through.
And I love that. I think it's part of the why this film is so beautifully grounded in reality, in that trauma is messy and there's no clean break after an experience like that.
No, exactly.
Even though she sort of gets rid of the person that was putting her through this, and well, both of them, and the main guy, Adrian, there will still be stuff to deal with.
Exactly.
Even if he's gone. And in a way, the film even does that at the beginning, where Adrian is presumed dead, but she's not miraculously okay. It just doesn't go away that quickly.
No.
And I love the fact that even though she's kind of clawed her way out of as much of it as possible, there will be still stuff to get over and stuff that she'll probably never be able to get back.
Yeah. Yeah. What a movie, man.
Fucking love it. honestly, living for this new era of the Universal Monster Universe.
Are you? Have you seen The Mummy?
Yeah.
What did you think? Did you like it?
Nah.
Nah, okay.
Nah.
Okay.
I
I thought
did
maybe you were the one person who liked it. I don't
Nah.
know. I was excited then for a
No.
moment.
I think they've admitted the failures of the Dark Cinematic Universe, but now we're taking a different approach.
Yeah. And I read today that Elizabeth Banks was going to do The Invisible Woman.
Yes, she is.
Excited.
I mean, The Invisible Woman, it's a film from the 40s, but it's a comedy.
Right.
So actually, there's a whole... This is not new shit. After kind of the establishment of the original Universal Monsters, there were sort of female versions of all the monsters. There were, like, they exist. You can go back. They're not included in all the fancy Blu-ray packs.
Sure.
But they're there. Very often they just weren't going as deep into the horrific as their male
Interesting.
counterparts were.
Yeah. Well, I am really up for an Elizabeth Banks Invisible Woman. Big time.
Yeah, I'm also up for a new Mummy, but I'm more of a fan of the Brendan Fraser one.
Oh, Anna.
Yes.
That's a conversation for another time.
That's a conversation for another podcast. Becky, thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a film.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about your work?
So on Twitter, I'm Bunny Dark. On Letterboxd, I'm Becky Dark. I've got a couple of podcasts that are doing the rounds, but just follow me on Twitter and everything's on there.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Are you okay?
He's sitting in that chair.
Thanks so much for doing this. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for chatting to me.
I saw the film last night and it was really striking for multiple reasons. But before I kind of get into some of the themes and the construction of the film that I wanted to talk to you about, could you talk a little bit about your own relationship with The Invisible Man, both the novel and the 1933 film?
Well, my relationship to the Invisible Man has kind of been, tangential in that sense of he's a part of that rock star club of monsters that's been around for a long time. You've got your Draculas, the Wolfman, you've got Frankenstein, and my introduction to those characters, I remember one day I stayed home from school and watched the film Mad Monster Party. Have you ever seen this film?
Yeah.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually...
Not as well known as it should be.
I know. And it's a good gateway drug for kids into these monster characters because it's all done with the stop motion animation. It's very 60s. There's a lot of grooving and like a lot of sort of 60s kind of 60s camp, but that I remember was the first time these monsters really registered for me. I remember after that film, I became kind of obsessed with these monster characters. Anything to do with Transylvania or anything in that realm, I was really interested in for a long time. I used to go through these obsessions as a kid that drove my father crazy. Like I would go through a 6-month James Bond obsession, and then it would be over, and I would move on to something else. There was a cycle of obsessions.
I mean, I can relate. I still go through that.
I know, yeah, I kind of do too. I remember the shark one lasted a long time. After I saw Jaws, there might have been a year or two of shark obsession.
There's also been a shark film renaissance in the last couple of years, so you must have enjoyed that.
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is that Spielberg kind of dropped the mic on shark movies. Like, I mean, I'm sorry to all the people out there who've made shark movies since Jaws, but nothing's ever measured up. Nobody's ever said, well, that's equal to Jaws in terms of shark menace.
But have you seen The Meg, though?
You know what? I haven't seen them. I'm going to say it's not up there with Jaws. But so that was my relationship with The Invisible Man, was sort of, he was this pop culture totem that was always in my peripheral vision. I mean, they're used every day. My daughter watches animated movies starring Dracula as voiced by Adam Sandler and The Invisible Man as voiced by David Spade. And the iconography of those monsters has become so familiar that they can use it in children's films now. It's that safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so when this idea of doing The Invisible Man was suggested to me, my first thought was, how do I get it out of that familiarity? How do I strip away all the familiar icons of this character, the hat and the trench coat and the bandages. I had to literally and metaphorically strip away the bandages and kind of concentrate on the core idea of the character.
And what for you is the core idea for it? Because one of the most refreshing films about the film for me was that you're right, these classic monster characters became comical almost because they were so overly
ubiquitous,
adapted. Yeah, and they were everywhere, and even from the time that they were even created in a cinematic form, they became sources of humor or sympathy.
Right.
Whether it's this version of the Invisible Man, which I must admit I never saw as a monster or a particularly menacing figure, became monstrous. How did you kind of think about making him monstrous again?
Well, I started with the character and that power. You start with the power. And movies always have to live up to the promise of the premise. Like, if you are going to make a movie about an invisible man, you need to exploit that. Like, you need to answer the question, what is an invisible man capable of? So I had a notepad, much like yours. That's how I always start when I'm screenwriting. I like to prolong the period of gathering ideas and just thinking about the film. I like to think about the film for a good couple of months before I ever write a word. And during that time, I was listing various things that the Invisible Man could do to you. And it was everything from steal your car keys. Like, he could steal things from you. Mm-hmm. He could be standing right next to you, and when you look away for 1 second, he makes your phone disappear, and suddenly it's like, where's my phone? So that's obviously at the lowest level of things he could do, all the way to the highest level of, more malevolent, serious things that he could do. And I had that list, and slowly I worked my way through that list, and I would sort of pick out the highlights. And I knew I wanted to start small and get big. And so that was really how I made the character scary, I think, or tried to, is by concentrating on what this person is capable of with invisibility.
And at what point did you decide to focus the actual story on not him, but actually one of his victims? One of his victims, really, because there's several in the film.
Right. I think that was very early on. I think, past iterations of The Invisible Man have concentrated on him as a character study. And, the original novel is all about this character's descent into madness, which I think is great. And obviously H.G. Wells was so far ahead of his time with his stories. I mean, they're still resonating today. War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man are still resonating in today's pop culture, which is pretty incredible when you think about when they were written. But I felt that a modern audience would not be as scared by the idea of someone's descent into madness as they would if they put themselves in the shoes of a victim of this person. So you assume the descent into madness, and you pick up the story where that shift to psychopathy has already happened. And now he's putting his attention on someone. Like in the original Invisible Man movie in 1933, mm-hmm. he victimizes people. He does murder people. Well, all I did was change the camera angle. Now I'm looking at the movie through the eyes of his murder victim. And what's that like? What's it like to wake up in the middle of the night and feel like there's someone in the room with you? In fact, sometimes when I'm writing a film, I'll start to think of the movie almost in terms of trailer images. Like the trailer will come to me first before I've written anything. And one of the first trailer images I had, which is actually in the final trailer, but this was one of the first things, was the image. I had the image in my mind of a woman sitting in a room. She was talking to someone, and then she looked over and said, "There's someone in that chair." And I could imagine the camera pushing in on the chair, and then sure enough, that moment is in the trailer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really a matter of just letting these ideas coming to you and just being able to decipher which are the good ones and which are the bad ideas.
And I wanted to ask you kind of to dig a little bit deeper on the theme of control, which I found so prevalent in the film, and how Adrian Griffith really just gets off on controlling everyone and everything around him, especially Cecilia. And what sort of research or thinking or collaborations did you seek to really dig into the mechanisms that someone who can use to create such an emotional hold and eventually gaslighting on someone?
Yeah, I mean, I started off, doing a lot of reading online. I would go down that hole, and I was reading a lot about controlling personalities and what they do. I then graduated up to, interviews. I interviewed some counselors at a domestic violence shelter for women in Los Angeles. And the counselors were really interesting. They were very gracious with their time. And they talked to me a lot about that control aspect. They would tell stories about men who would put locks on the fridge because they wanted to control when their partners could eat. Even there was that level of. It's one thing to have an idea that maybe this personality exists, but it's another thing to have someone actually tell you a story and to realize that there is a very specific type of personality that gets off on control to a really pathological degree. It goes far beyond. I mean, look, I'm a film director. I could be described as a control freak. I think, if my wife was in on this interview, she would say, but I'd like to think I have the control tendencies under control, have my own controlling nature under control, and it's at least sits at the line of healthy. It's shocking to realize the pathology and the lengths to which some people need to go to. Their control needs to be all-consuming. In the case of partners, they control when they leave the house who they talk to. They listen in on their phone calls. They track them on their phone. I mean, these days, tech has allowed us to see where somebody is. So you can get a text at the supermarket saying, "What are you doing at the supermarket? You didn't tell me you were going out."
And we see that from the very beginning, the way that his entire house is completely controlled by cameras.
Yes,
and
everything
is on their phones.
Exactly. Like, I wanted to give this feeling of total surveillance in the house. It's like a beautiful prison, that house. It's this architecturally forward-thinking house, but really it's this concrete box that is just surveilled by cameras, walls, dogs. There's this sense of to get out of it, you have to escape the same way you would escape from a prison.
You
have to turn off alarms and
It feels very much kind of like an Alcatraz type house.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit actually about the production design, particularly about Adrian's house or even lair, because it feels like a very high-tech version of a mad scientist lair.
Right, yeah.
How did you work with your production designer? Did you have any particular references that you wanted to bring into that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a lot of references. Alex Holmes was the production designer. He did The Babadook. And so I was aware of his work. I really love that film. And in chatting to him, I could see his ingenuity. The Babadook was made for the smell of an oily rag. And he had to do a lot with a little. And, Jennifer Kent was very demanding in her production design requirements. If you see that film, it's a very high design. It's almost a fairy tale.
Oh, yeah, I know it well. And it's also extremely oppressive because most of it is set in one single house.
Yes, and it doesn't quite feel real, but that's the aesthetic they were going for. I was going for the opposite aesthetic, seeing as we're dealing with a character that people already have a knowledge of, and it comes with a lot of gothic trappings, that when you think of this character, you don't just think of the bandages and the hat, you think of Victorian London. Yeah, you think of the doctor's case, the kit, and the image of that silhouette walking down the fog-bound street. So I wanted to make the very modern, clinical, grounded, realistic version. And so our references were a lot of very suburban and urban images, not just stills from other films, but we had paintings and references, color schemes. And it was always just came back to this relentless realism that Alex was so great at. And the house was part of that. I didn't want to make it feel like a lair, like a villain's lair. It had to be beautiful and oppressive at the same time so that you could believe the character would want to live there. And I thought he did an amazing job with the lab. And that's another one that's hard to pull off. I mean, a lab. How do you do that without getting into Tony Stark territory?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you're making an Iron Man film, it gives you a lot of license to be a little bit colorful and a little bit larger than life because the character is this larger than life character. And that's the way that they made that film. And I thought the original Iron Man film was just a rollicking good time. I loved it. But I wanted to do exactly the opposite. I kept saying to Alex, we've got to get away from Tony Stark. We have to buy that this laboratory is a very homemade, something a wealthy person would have in their basement, if they were in this.
It actually reminded me a lot of the laboratory in The Skin I Live In, the Almodovar film.
Oh, well, yeah, that was interesting. That film was kind of chilling as well.
Yeah, exactly. But also a home mad scientist lab.
Yeah. You're right. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. It's there's a certain way that people live now. Our tech has consumed our lives, and I think it's coming into our homes. It's not just like your average person these days can walk into their kitchen and demand a song, and some disembodied voice will say, playing Neil Young, and we don't think anything of it. So I knew I could incorporate that tech integration into this house, and people would buy it. They wouldn't think it was too over the top.
I wanted to move on to Cecilia's character. I love that we sort of see her rise up through the film. We meet her possibly at her worst possible situation, completely under Adrian's control, and you feel through Elizabeth's performance the constant panic and fear and control that she's under, but just this spark of the need for survival and escape. And I wanted to ask you kind of, how did you collaborate with her on fleshing out this character? Because even wordlessly, and as she goes through her trauma, it's very difficult for her to move or to speak or even to make simple gestures or actions or connections with people. How did you flesh that out with her without it falling into the trappings of sort of becoming a damaged or overly victimized woman?
Right. It's tough to calibrate. I mean, I give Lizzie full credit. She was a huge collaborator, and the second we got on the phone, I said to her, I want your collaboration and your input, because I'm writing a film here with a central female character dealing with a lot of these issues that affect women, and being that I'm a male writer, I feel like I don't have total authority on this issue, and I needed that perspective. And she was really generous. We spent hours sitting in rooms combing through the script, and she would just give me her perspective. It wasn't like she was rewriting the script. Even little tiny razor cut changes that she would make. It's like Death by 1,000 Cuts. Like, all of the tiny little contributions she made on every line of the film added up to this huge picture. And I don't think I could have made this film without her. I can't imagine anyone else in the role, but I also can't imagine making it with someone who didn't want to contribute, who just said, some actors are like, just tell me where to stand and I'll say the lines, I'm here to do a job. I don't know how this film would have gone if I'd had one of those actors, because I needed that contribution. And she was great. She's a fully grown woman. She has a lot of stories in her own life that she can relate to with this story, and relationships that she's been in, and so she would share stories with me, and we would talk about it, and we would try to incorporate it, in any way we could.
And how did you balance those almost two complementary types of performances that you managed to get out of her, of both the very raw emotional side and the incredibly physical side, especially in the confrontations with the Invisible Man?
Yeah, she would laugh if she was here, because the one thing she said she didn't love about the film was the physical stuff. She's not a gym rat by her own admission. She's like, ugh, I hate she keeps saying to me, like, I didn't know I was going to have to do so much running in this film. I should have read the script more closely. But, what's funny is, between action and cut, she can do anything. She told me this story. She was working on top of the lake, and she had to be playing darts in a pub. And she told me she'd barely played darts in her life. For some reason, just didn't come up. And there she was, and as a practice run, she threw a dart, and it nearly hit the craft services guy in the head. It was so far off the board. And everybody's looking at each other like, how are we going to... Because the script requires her to be in this, match of skill. So they call action, bullseye. Another bullseye. Somehow, between action and cut, she becomes another person, and she can do whatever's... And then as soon as you call cut, she can't play darts anymore. Like something weird happens. And when she told me that story, I was like, wow, this really is who she is, because she would be looking at the stunt scene and she'd be thinking, oh, I don't know how we're going to do this. And then you would call action and it was incredible. Like she just transformed. Her body does whatever's required for the scene. And so full credit to her. They weren't easy scenes, being dragged around by wires, and she was up for anything that was not really dangerous. There were a couple of things that were actually pretty dangerous and we had to bring in the stunt person, but most of the time it was her.
It really reminded me really strongly of this film from the 80s called The Entity.
Yeah, The Entity, yeah.
Very maligned at the time, and I think wrongly so, but it really brought up this kind of notion of women's stories not being believed.
Right.
So I wonder if did you think about how, where did you know that they were going to touch a huge cultural nerve, or did you specifically want to explore what it's like for a female character, a woman in that position, to be constantly disbelieved?
I don't know. It rose organically out of the writing of the script. Like I started with the character, and as I'm writing and I'm figuring out that this woman is escaping this relationship, it started to speak to these issues that were being talked about. But the thing is, this stuff's always been around. It's not as if domestic violence is a thing that just happened. Like, what's new is that people are talking about it in a more public way. Suddenly a few rocks have been kicked over and they've exposed the cockroaches underneath. And we're having a public conversation, and it's enlightening and sobering for a male such as myself to hear these stories of just how common sexual assault is, just how common verbal abuse is, just how common all this stuff is. You want to believe it's not that common. You want to believe that only the bad guys do it, when you realize that every woman you know has a story to tell, becomes kind of shameful. And so that conversation was being played out as I was writing the film, almost in tandem. So I think I wasn't trying to exploit the issue or say, haha, I'm going to be the first Me Too movie. It was more that I was thinking that this idea of an invisible man spoke very loudly to the idea of the unseen threat and not being believed. What better metaphor can you get than the invisible man? And I think that's why these monsters have lasted, because whether it's Dracula or the invisible man, you can shape the story of who they are to our current anxieties. You could make a Dracula movie about the coronavirus. You can...
I mean, that's the power of horror, isn't it?
Yeah,
that you can talk about taboo subjects and social anxieties under the guise of monsters and
just
make
entertainment.
believe. Yeah.
Just pure drive-in, grindhouse entertainment. It's always happened. I mean, I see a lot of people online saying, don't cram messages into my horror movies. But the thing is, filmmakers are always saying something. They're always, Night of the Living Dead is about the Vietnam War, but you don't have to view it that way. You can just view it as a zombie movie, an entertaining zombie movie. That Trojan horse aspect of horror movies has always been one of their greatest strengths, because it means that people are in the multiplex taking something in, and they don't know they're taking it in. I love that about the horror genre, and this movie doesn't make me an authority on anything. What it is a testament to this character that H.G. Wells created over 100 years ago. A character that was created over 100 years ago. The fact that a movie can be made in 2020 and spark some sort of cultural interest and resonate with the current culture, it doesn't speak to any screenwriting skill that I have. It speaks to the power and resilience of this character. And how malleable it is, how you can wrap it around things. So yeah, I feel privileged to be able to carry the torch of this IP for another. There'll be someone else in the future is going to make an Invisible Man movie. I'm not going to be the last, but if I can contribute to the history of this character, if this is a little marker on the history, then I'm happy,
To wrap up, can I ask you about the characterization of Adrian, but not so much the characterization, but the choice to keep him out of sight. And for a long part of the movie, I was completely convinced that we'd never see his face.
Right.
You'd see a hand, the silhouette, the fact that he was not kind of a big name actor as well was quite telling. Maybe it's a reveal, maybe it's Robert Downey Jr., who knows?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Was really fully expecting we'd never actually get to see the man that was creating all of this torture.
Right.
So could you talk a bit about the tension? Because we never really see his face until almost the very end.
Yeah.
So in a really roundabout way, my question is, what made you decide to really keep him out of sight for so much of the film?
I think it was basically me wanting to make this character mysterious and ethereal and unknowable. To me, the best monsters have an unknown quality to them. You know, one horror filmmaker that I love, who is not considered a horror filmmaker and wouldn't consider himself a horror filmmaker, is David Lynch, because he deals with this nightmare logic, and his movies have this strange otherworldly quality to them where you can't quite tap into it. It looks like our world, but the people are moving and speaking differently, and you can't grab onto the rules of his movies because there are no rules. And when there are no rules, you feel unsafe because anything could happen in his film. And I love that. You know, I love that quality that David Lynch has. And I knew I needed to bring something of that to this character. I can't put him front and center. If you want people to be afraid, you have to make them off guard, make them feel like this person could be everywhere. This character has not given any of themselves to me. They're not making anything easy. In fact, they are hiding. That's what the character is. You know, a lot of times when people try to portray the Invisible Man, they'll show that he's there by hanging some clothes on him. You know, put a coat and a hat on him. And even though that's the iconic image of this character, to me it's not interesting because that's the visible man. I like the invisible man. I like looking into the corner of a room and wondering if there's anybody there. So that was just something that I had not seen done with a movie like this, that I wanted to kind of exploit a little bit.
And it also allows us to project whatever fears we have or whoever we fear as well onto this figure because he's faceless for such a long time. Yeah,
exactly. The fear of the unknown. Like, the audience's imagination is the most powerful tool you have. It really is. Like, think of all the monster movies that came in the wake of Jaws. Like, Jaws really kickstarted this trend. There's a lot of monster movies made before Jaws, obviously. You know, King Kong, etc., etc. But what Jaws did, it started this structural trend of we hide the monster, we hide the monster, we hide the monster. Third act, we show you the monster. And then every monster movie made post-Jaws, from The Relic to whatever, follows that template set by Jaws. Think about, in all those movies, think about how disappointed you were when you finally saw the monster in the cold light of day. It never lived up to the shadow. Because your imagination was crazier than the filmmakers and the prosthetics could be. I remember having that feeling. And so The Invisible Man's perfect because there is no reveal. You know, the reveal is he's not there. So I really love messing around with that.
Thank you so much for your time. No, it's been lovely speaking to you.
Thank you.
And I'm wishing you the best of luck with the film as well.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for another episode of the Final Girls podcast. Please do rate and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. We're everywhere. You can find out more about what we do on thefinalgirls.co.uk and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at thefinalgirlsuk. You can also follow Becky on Twitter at BonnieDark, and I am on Anna B. Demented. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more witchy goodness next week.